Good morning, everyone. I'm Jared Morrison, and I work with Shalise in the Learning and Organizational Development Unit for OSU Extension, and we're excited to welcome you in this morning for our first breakout session of the day with our presenter, Melanie Garcia. Melanie, thank you so much for being here. A little bit about Melanie. She's a corporate training account executive. She's a facilitator and executive coach for the Ohio State University Worcester campus. In her role as a corporate training account executive and registered corporate coach, Melanie designs and implements leadership development, supervisory, and industrial training programs for all types of organizations, corporate, nonprofit, facilitated workshops, and coach individual employees to success as well. She holds certifications from the Worldwide Association of Business Coaches and Development Dimensions International and International Human Resources and Leadership Development Consultancy. And she holds bachelor's degree in international relations from Miami University and a master's of business administration from Ashland University. So certainly well-rounded within the state here and doing lots of good work. So we're very excited that Melanie was able to join us this morning for an important topic of conflict resolution and dealing with difficult people. And Melanie, I will turn it to you if you are ready to take it over.
Sure, thank you. Good morning, everybody. First of all, welcome to Monday. This is day 3 of your workshop, but it's a brand new week, and I caught you first thing in the morning while you're fresh. So hopefully you're getting your morning coffee in you, and we're all awake and ready to go. I really love today's topic because sometimes when you go to training, you think, oh, that was a waste of time, or that wasn't really applicable to my role. But I have never met anyone who can't find something useful in this topic, because we all face conflict, whether it's at home or at work or in the community, and we all deal with difficult people sometimes. I'm sure somebody's face just popped right into your mind when I said that this morning. So I feel like wherever you apply this information, at home, at work, it's going to be useful to you. So I do want to note that what I'm sharing today is a very condensed version of what is normally a 4 to 5 hour workshop. So I'm going to be able to just scratch the surface, but I think we'll still walk away with some useful information and some useful tools. First, I want you to think about the words that you associate with conflict. When you think of the word conflict, what are some of the first words that come to mind? Jared is going to pop a whiteboard up here for us. And on just the top half of the screen, he's going to draw a little line. On the top half, I want you to go ahead and just click on that text and type in the first words you think of when you think of conflict. Do that above the green line. Disagreement. Good, Don. Go ahead. There are 55 of you out there, so we should have words popping up here left and right. Struggle. Good, Elena. And if you're not sure how to make a word appear up there, you can just unmute your microphone and shout it out. That's fine. Different opinions. Great, Alyssa. Contention, stress. Thanks, Deborah. Making Jared work here this morning. Disagreement. Good. Can't get to type, but scary, anxiety, uncomfortable. Okay, that's good. We'll add anxiety, scary, friction. Oh, that's a good one, Karen. Preconceived ideas. Good. Closed-minded. Thanks, Tina. All right, I think that's a good. So I want you to look at these words, and when you look at each of them, disagreement, struggle, anxiety, friction, stress, closed-minded, difficult, passive-aggressive, Do those words generally have a positive or a negative connotation? Negative, thank you, Katie. Right, why is it that when we think of conflict, we automatically assume it has to be negative? And believe me, I've taught this workshop hundreds of times. Everyone goes to the same place mentally when we hear the word conflict. Every once in a while, I'll have someone who says opportunity, and they are definitely the outlier, but the majority of us go to a negative place when we hear the word conflict. So my point is that in today's session, I want to teach you some tools so that you don't necessarily assume all conflict has to be negative, right? Because I think the reason we think conflict is a negative thing is because we don't have the tools to deal with it. So it makes us nervous, it makes us uncomfortable, it makes us stressed and anxious. So I'm going to teach you some tools so that you can approach it from maybe a little bit more of a scientific approach and a little less of a negative approach. Below the line, I want you to chime in with what are some sources of stress at work? What kinds of things cause stress at work? No personal names, please. Don't just type in Jared. Oh my gosh. But things, different personalities, great. Different schedules, difficult people. Teresa, I love that because that, although that's the name of our workshop, I actually make a point of saying that people are not necessarily difficult. People exhibit difficult behaviors from time to time, and we want to be able to separate the behavior from the person. Just because somebody was, a pain in the butt when you were a waitress in college doesn't mean that person is always a pain in the butt. It could just mean at that particular time in the day or that particular stage in their life, they were having a difficult moment. So I want us to think of it as difficult behavior, and we deal with the behavior, not the person necessarily. Not enough time, different personalities, different stages of life, work ethic. Yes, a difference in work ethic, difference in generations. Boy, you guys are good. You hit all the things that I normally talk about. Good. So as you can see, there are a million different reasons that we might have conflicts at work. Some of them are things that are within our control, like a lack of understanding. We can work to better understand something, but things like different generations or different personalities, those we just need to work with. We can't really necessarily change those. Schedules we maybe can have some influence on. So some of these things are within our control and some of them aren't. But if we can find a way to learn to deal with these different conflicts, how would that benefit us? If you were really good at dealing with conflict, how would that affect you personally? Would it make that anxiety and stress maybe not disappear, but maybe shrink a little? Would we be able to accept the fact that people have different opinions and that doesn't necessarily have to lead to a conflict? It could lead to a really interesting conversation where we learn about each other and we learn something we hadn't thought of before. So I want you to think of all of these words up here lead us to a point where if we can become better at dealing with conflict, we can reap those benefits of reduced stress, reduced anxiety, reduced friction in the workplace, less passive aggressive behavior, less anger, and see it as an opportunity to end up with a better result than if we hadn't had the conflict, if we hadn't dealt with it, if we'd swept it under the rug. We might have all this anxiety and friction, but if we actually learn to deal with it effectively and relatively quickly, we could reduce the stress, reduce the anxiety, and come up with a better result. All right, thank you, Jared. We can close up the whiteboard. We don't need it anymore. You can just erase it. And we'll get my presentation back up here. There we go. Okay, good. So our objectives for today are to recognize the amount of time we spend on conflict and try to reclaim that time, because you'll be surprised to find out how much of your day is actually spent dealing with conflict. Maybe you won't be surprised. We also want to understand that conflict resolution is a social skill that can be developed. It is, there are techniques, there are tactics, and just like being a better public speaker or being better at, asking questions and uncovering information, conflict resolution is a social skill and we can get better at it. We also want to learn to identify and execute the appropriate conflict mode for any conflict situation. Remember when I said we want to get a little bit more of a scientific approach to dealing with conflict? Here it is. There are 5 different ways to deal with conflict. We're going to learn about all 5 and when each one is most appropriate. And then it becomes a little bit more of a process than an emotional reaction. Any questions so far? We're all awake, the coffee's working. Okay. So why should we even talk about conflict? Well, because as managers or even just individuals, we spend about 25% of our day dealing or trying to resolve a conflict. How many of you would like to get 25% of your day back? We could claw some of that time back. Even if we clawed back 5, 10, 15% of that, we've got that much more time in our day to get other things accomplished and maybe not have to work so many extra hours. So that is a big reason for talking about conflict. If you got a 25% discount on something, or you got 25% more chocolate when you bought your chocolate bar, that would be good, right? So if we can, 25% is a pretty big chunk. We'd like to get that time back. It also, the same study also says that the average employee spends 2.1 hours each week, which is almost a whole extra day each month, dealing with interpersonal conflict some way. So that could mean you're the one having a conflict with somebody, or that could mean you're the one getting dragged into someone else's conflict, or having to listen to a coworker drone on and on, or ask your advice about a conflict. Either way, it's sucking your time. And those 2.1 hours each week, you could be doing something else and being more productive, or just being less stressed about it. So we know that conflict wastes a lot of people's time, not just the 2 people in the conflict. And when our conflict isn't managed, that drains other resources other than time. It obviously drains our time. It drains money, because what aren't we doing during those 2.1 hours each week? Not doing our job. And if you're a manager of people, they aren't doing their job either. So that is exponentially more time being wasted. And we all know that wasted time ends up being wasted money. So we need to resolve conflict, and we need to be good at doing it so that we can do it quickly, so we can claw back this 25% of the time. Now, there is one bright spot about conflict, and one thing is that it isn't all bad. In fact, some people's jobs actually depend on conflict. Can you think of any jobs in our society that wouldn't exist if it weren't for conflict? You can use the chat, or you can unmute your microphone and just shout it out. Some of our own jobs may not exist if there weren't conflict. I wouldn't be teaching conflict resolution workshops if there were no conflict. But are there other jobs in our society that really rely on, having to resolve conflict? If we think about our judicial system, would we need police officers? Would we need attorneys? Would we need parole officers? Would we need, therapists and counselors? All of those jobs require conflict to exist, so that so conflict does have some positives. It does sometimes result in a better outcome, but it also somewhat drives our economy. There are a lot of jobs that wouldn't exist if it weren't for conflict. So that's a new way of thinking about it. So just so that we're all operating from the same definition of conflict, here's one that I like to use. Conflict is simply the condition in which people's concerns, the things that they care about, appear to be incompatible. And the trick there, the important word there is appear to be incompatible, right? We often assume that the way I see it is the only way to see it. And that's why I'm fighting, because this person is obviously too stupid to realize that the way I'm seeing it is the right way. And I'm going to argue with them until they see it my way. And how effective is that? Probably not very. So that key is that appear to be incompatible. I want to show you a slide here to illustrate my point. And when I flip the slide, I want you to just say, either in chat or by unmuting, tell me what you see. All right, you ready? 1, 2, 3. What do you see there? Yeah, somebody sees two faces, somebody sees a vase. Wow, this is the first group that I've seen more people with that see the vase first. 9 times out of 10 people see the two black faces. And I usually only have 1 or 2 in each group that see the white vase. I don't know what that means, but I've just noticed that over the years. So obviously there are 2 different things there, right? There are the 2 black faces. Does everybody see that now? Even if you saw the vase first, you now can see, once I pointed out, that there are the silhouette of 2 faces facing each other. And then in the center is a white vase or candlestick or whatever you want to call it. If you saw the white vase first, were you able to see the 2 black faces once I pointed it out? Yeah, and vice versa. If you saw if you saw the white vase, were you able to see the 2 black faces once I pointed that out? Right. So this is, I think, the perfect representation of how a conflict should work. We come into a conflict with a set idea of what we think the issue is or how we see things. We come in seeing the white vase, and that's all there is there. But in an ideal situation, there's some give and take, there's some conversation, some sharing of ideas and information so that we start to see that there are also, the other side of the story, the other perspective, start to see the 2 black faces or the 2 black faces. So I want you, if you remember nothing else from today's workshop, I want you to remember this slide. And I want you to remember that there are always 2 equally valid and legitimate sides to each conflict. We just don't always see it. And we need to work to see it. Just as it was fairly easy here to see the other side, it can be just as easy to learn to seek out the other person's side. You still may not agree with them. That's okay. We're not asking you to switch sides altogether. We're just asking you to go into a conflict knowing that there are 2 equally valid sides to each story. 2 equally valid perspectives. And as soon as we change our mindset to believe that, we're going to come into the conflict much less defensive, much less combative, and much more open to trying to see the other side. I want you to walk into the next conflict thinking, what am I not seeing? Where's the white vase in this situation? So I think that if there's one slide that represents the whole workshop today, I think it's this one. I want you to remember that. Now, we all know that if we were able to get our emotions in check in a conflict situation, we'd be much better and much better able to try to see that other person's perspective. But sometimes emotions get in the way and we don't always have the presence of mind to be looking for the other perspective. So how do we get a grip on that? Well, I want everyone to understand that how we approach a conflict has a lot to do with our paradigms and how we see things. And we do have a choice in the matter. So our paradigms, those are our beliefs or values that are based on our background, our personality, our life experiences. That's basically, the baggage of life that we bring with us. Do we have much control over our personality or our life experiences, the family we were raised in, and so on? We really don't. We don't have a lot of choice there. But we do know that our paradigm, our baggage, affects our perception. It affects how we view people, things, situations, even ourselves. Do we have any control over our perceptions? We do. We do have a little control over our perceptions. We can't necessarily stop a perception from happening. Those stereotypes that we have about certain groups of people or a certain type of personality. We can't necessarily stop the fact that we have that perception because that's somewhat automatic based on our paradigm. But what we can do is recognize that our perception could be wrong, that we don't have all the information, that this person isn't necessarily just like the next person from that same department or from that same company or from that same ethnic group or stereotype. We know that those are that just because we had a bad situation with somebody from that department doesn't mean everybody in that department acts that way, for example. So we do have some control over our perception. We can at least recognize that our perceptions are not always right. Our perceptions then affect our behaviors, how we act. Do we have control over our behavior? We do. That's the one thing in this whole slide that we actually have 100% control over. And if we're able to recognize that our paradigms affect our perceptions are affecting our behavior, we can put the brakes on somewhere between perceptions and behavior and just kind of check our perception at the door. Say, oh, is this perception based on a past experience with someone else? If so, that's not fair to apply that perception to this new person who did not do all the same things or say all the same things that a previous person did. It just may be that they kind of look like that person, or they sound like that person, or they're in the same role as that person. That's not fair to carry your perception to that new person and have it have your reaction be based on that. So I had a similar situation where my paradigms and perceptions actually caused me to behave in a really negative way in my first job right out of college. I had gone to high school in a small town, and there was this girl who named Jen, who was what we would call today a bully. She basically, she stole my lunch. She called me Smelanie instead of Melanie. Basically did everything to be that typical bully. And as a result, I did everything I could to avoid her and just not have anything to do with her. So fast forward about a decade, and I was in my first day of a new job in Chicago, and my boss took me around to introduce me to my new coworkers. And there was this woman Susan, who stood up and shook my hand, and I just kind of froze because she sounded like Jen. She carried herself like Jen. Her mannerisms were very similar. She looked a little bit like her, but it was just a coincidence. It was not Jen, the bully from junior high and high school. It was Susan, perfectly nice person. But because of my background, my baggage with Jen, my perception was that, oh, if this Susan person sounds and moves and talks like Jen, then she's probably going to treat me like Jen. And so my behavior, based on that paradigm and that faulty perception, my behavior towards Jen, or towards Susan, the new coworker, was not particularly pleasant. I had a little bit of a chip on my shoulder. I didn't tend to take her ideas very seriously or her questions. I didn't necessarily respond to her emails in a very timely manner, and I didn't even realize I was doing it until one day my boss called me into the office and said, "Hey, Susan's saying you're kind of difficult to work with on this project, and it's a really important project that I assigned you to, and what can you tell me about that?" She says, "You're not returning her calls in a timely manner. You kind of blow off her suggestions. You're just kind of doing your own thing on this project, and that's not really what I had in mind." She said, "You're being kind of difficult." And of course, in your first job, you're absolutely mortified to hear that you're being difficult. And he helped me kind of work through this little thing that I'm going to show you. He kind of sketched this out on the back of a piece of scrap paper in his office. And I've used it to this day because it's a really simple way to just kind of walk through your paradigms and kind of figure out why you're behaving the way you are, or maybe why someone else is behaving the way they are. And this is on page 3 in your handout if you want to jot down some notes. I just call it simply the circle diagram. The blue circle is where you write down, where am I coming from in this conflict? What's my paradigm? What's my history? What's happened in my past that maybe is affecting me in this situation or is influencing me. In this case, my paradigm was a history of, Jen the bully, and my perception of the situation and the other person in regard to Susan. Well, my perception was if she sounded and acted like Jen, then if she sounded and looked like Jen, she was probably going to treat me the way Jen had. And my fear was, I didn't want to look stupid on my first job or do a bad job on this project. My most comfortable style, as we'll learn later of the 5 styles, it was avoiding. If there's somebody that I'm in a conflict with, I just avoid them. I kind of shut them out. And that's what I was doing with Susan. So my boss had me think about Susan's side of the story in that red circle. What are her paradigms? What do you think her perception of me and the situation is? Well, she probably thinks that I don't like her for some reason, and she can't figure out why, can't figure out what she did wrong. She thinks I'm kind of difficult to work with, and she's not real crazy about doing this project with me. Her fears and motives, what are her concerns? Probably the same as mine. She wanted to do a good job on this project for our boss, and we're not doing a very good job on the project, mostly because of me. and she doesn't want that to reflect poorly on her. What do we suppose her most comfortable style in dealing with conflict is? Well, it's probably a more collaborative approach because she went to her boss for help. She didn't just try to, avoid me or confront me. She was reaching out for her resources. So my boss had me think about this purple circle. What do Susan and I have in common? Because that middle circle is where we start to make progress on our conflict. What do we have in common? Do we have any common goals or concerns? And in this case, we did. It was that we both really wanted to do a good job on this project that he had assigned us and hopefully, impress him. So that's what he taught me to do is, okay, this is where we need to go from here. We need to focus on the purple circle, focus on what we have in common. So in this case, once you identify your common goals, I had to modify my behavior because that was really all I had control over in this situation. And sometimes you can just change your behavior and things get better. But in this case, I really owed Susan an apology. And I didn't want to explain the whole Jen the bully and her calling me Melanie all through school. I didn't really want to relive that. So I just made it pretty simple. I just said, Susan, I'm really sorry I've been difficult to work with lately. It has nothing to do with you. And I'm really sorry that we started off on the wrong foot. I would really like to do a good job on this project for our boss, referencing that common goal. And is that what you want too? Yes, got her commitment. What is it that we need to do to get the project back on track? And then we were able to move forward. And then I had to continue checking my behavior to make sure that I wasn't sliding back into my old patterns. And I asked her for her help in that. I said, you know what, if you see me, if I'm not returning your calls, if I'm not, if I'm slipping back into that old behavior, please call me out on it because I don't mean to, it's not you. I just have a past with someone very similar and I'm trying not to project onto you. And from then we got along quite well because she understood where I was coming from. I asked for her assistance in calling me out if I slipped back into those old behaviors. And we ended up doing a really good job on the project, but it was a bumpy start. But I do thank my first boss for teaching me this circle diagram because it's easy to remember. It's easy to scribble on the back of a napkin somewhere. It's easy to work through it with someone else or just on your own. So for those of you who manage other people, this might be a useful tool for you to help those two people kind of see where they're coming from and to help them focus on the common goals. Oh, well, thank you, Stephanie. All right. So that circle diagram is pretty cool, right? We just look at it from one perspective, look at it from the other perspective, find out what we have in common, and boom, we're done, right? If only it were that simple. The reason that some of us aren't able to do that, or that it's not always the first thing we think of, is because we have an emotional reaction to conflict. All those negative emotions that you listed at the beginning are real. They really happen. And part of the reason that they happen is because of this tiny little part of our brain called the amygdala that is responsible for processing emotion, particularly fear and anger. This is the part of the body that is in charge of that fight or flight syndrome that we hear about sometimes. So when you get really angry or really upset about something and your emotions get out of control, what do you do to calm down? Or what are we always told to do to calm down? Go ahead and put that in the chat. What are kind of the old wives' tales or the advice that we always get from people when you're angry? Count to 10, right? Breathe. Good, Jared. Michelle says diversion, right? Try to think of something else. Good. Take a deep breath. Good. Those are all things that we're told to do. Now, to take a deep breath, and sometimes we're told, go for a walk, take a deep breath, count to 10, all of those things. They're all kind of on the right path. But the reason we're trying to do them is because we're trying to buy ourselves some time for this fight or flight syndrome to run its course and help us get back to normal. And when we have that fight or flight syndrome, we have all these physical symptoms. Our heart starts pounding. We might start to sweat. We might, get clammy hands. We might start to shake. Our face might get red. I have a splotch of skin on my chest that gets bright red whenever I'm angry. So even if I'm keeping under control visibly, that's like the surefire signal that I'm upset about something. So does anyone know how long it takes the fight or flight syndrome to run its course and have your body calm down again to the point where you can think rationally? Anyone know? Take a guess. It's like 2 hours, a day, a week, 15 minutes. Yeah. It takes about 20 minutes for that fight or flight syndrome to run its course. So if someone says, just count to 10, well, unless you're counting really slowly, that's not going to cut it. What we do need to do in those 20 minutes, the very best advice is breathe, deep breaths. So we all know that the brain works on oxygen, and the best way to get oxygen is to actually breathe it in. So the more oxygen we can get to the brain, the better it's going to work, because during that fight or flight syndrome, the amygdala tells the brain, oh, you don't need blood, you don't need oxygen. We're going to divert all that oxygen to your arms and legs so that you can either fight or take flight. So the blood actually drains away from our brain and out into our arms and legs, into our major muscle groups. So if we don't have blood in the brain, we don't have the oxygen supply that the brain needs to think calmly and rationally and to react appropriately. So that's why we need to stall for 20 minutes. We need to take a whole lot of deep breaths to get the oxygen flow back to the brain so that we're able to think rationally and calmly. So when people sometimes say, oh, I was so angry, I couldn't even think straight, they're not lying. That's actually true. So to get that oxygen back into the blood, the absolute best thing you can do is take those deep breaths. And if you can do deep breaths for 20 minutes, that would be fantastic. But if you can only do it for a couple of minutes, that's better than nothing. So forget counting to 10, forget diversion, breathe. The breathing can be your diversion. The breathing can be your counting to 10. Just make sure you're counting to 10 and breathing a whole bunch of times. So first thing you want to do is breathe. In that 20-minute period when the fight or flight is running its course in your body and the blood is not in your brain and the oxygen is not in your brain, that is not the time to fire off an angry email. That is not the time to pick up the phone and call the person that you're upset with. It is not the time to make a major purchase or a major decision. It is the time to breathe. And the good thing about breathing is you can do it anywhere. If you're face to face with that person, if you're in a conference meeting and you're getting very angry, no one can tell that you're doing anything to calm yourself down by just breathing. It's kind of stealth that way. You can do it wherever you need to do it. So we want to breathe and don't make any major emails or phone calls during that 20-minute period. And if you are in a conflict situation and you feel yourself getting heated and you feel like that fight or flight is starting, that's when you tell the person, you know what, I think we're getting upset and we're not going to be productive. Why don't we take a break and let's reconvene? And ideally reconvene at least 20 minutes later in a new spot. Ideally in a neutral space like a conference room or a common area. But by yourself at least 20 minutes to calm down. So this is the part of the session where we talk about the five modes of conflict resolution. And you can take some notes on page 4 in your handout if you'd like. But basically, in our regular session, we spend a lot more time on this, so I'm just able to just very briefly describe these. But the 5 modes or ways of dealing with conflict are competing, which basically means I win, you lose. I'm in this to prove that I'm right and we're going to get my outcome come hell or high water. And you're going down. That's competing. Accommodating is I'll lose, I'm going to let you win. Doesn't matter, it's not worth it. You can have your way. Avoiding is, my favorite. What conflict? Avoiding is just pretending that there's nothing wrong and we're sweeping it under the rug. Collaborating is trying to find a way where we can both win. It's not a zero-sum game. We can both find a way to get what we need here. And compromising is kind of a correlation to collaborating. Compromising is we're both willing to give up a little something to get the big something that we want. So we'll both win a little and we'll both lose a little, which is different than collaborating, because collaborating is how can we both get 100% of what we each want. Compromise is, I'll give a little, I'll take a little. that's okay too. So these are basically the 5 ways we have to deal with a conflict. And I mentioned earlier that there's a little bit of a slightly more scientific process for dealing with conflict. And this is knowing that there are 5 different options for you to deal with a conflict. Most of us may recognize that one of these 5 feels like the one we probably do most often. And in our big workshop, when we do this for groups, we actually have you take an assessment called the TKI assessment, which actually identifies which of these 5 is your natural reaction to conflict. And most of you probably have a pretty good idea. But what we usually don't know is that there are at least 4 other tools that we could be using, and that one of those other tools might be better for a particular conflict. Because in each conflict situation, there is a best option. Let's talk about those different kind of situations and when each one is the best one. So when would we use competing? What kind of situations or what kind of conflicts is competing the best choice? Competing is the best choice on any kind of issue where you need to take a stand. For instance, safety procedures, rules and regulations, things like that, legal issues, where there is, it's a situation where this subject is so important that we really can't budge on it. Wearing your safety gear in a manufacturing plant, for instance. Also, we would use competing whenever we need to make quick, decisive action. Someone just collapsed on the floor. We're not going to sit and collaborate about who's going to do CPR. Someone's just going to shove their way through and start doing it. They're going to win on that because they have those skills. Anytime there's an important issue where we have to implement something that might be a little bit unpopular, say the company or the organization just changed, an HR policy. And yes, it isn't popular, but as the manager or the head of that department, it's your job to enforce it. You can't really collaborate or compromise on it. It's not your rule. You just have to enforce it. And then lastly, interestingly, we can use competing to protect ourselves from people who take advantage of non-competitive behavior. So in other words, bullies. Sometimes we just need to say enough is enough. And no, you're not getting your way on this one. So if you feel that there's somebody that's always kind of pushing you around and there's something where you need to take a stand, then that's where you want to compete. Any questions about competing? We'll kind of quickly go through the other 4. So the next tool that you have in your conflict resolution toolbox is collaborating. That's creating a win-win. How do we both win? So we use collaborating when both parties have something that's so important that they really just can't compromise. So we always tend to go into a conflict assuming it's a zero-sum game, that if I win, you don't. And that's really not true. There are plenty of ways where we both get what we want. We just may have to shift the timing, or we may have to shift some resources, or we may have to shift some other priorities, but it's not impossible. So if we go into conflicts with the collaborative mindset in these situations, we're going to have much better results. Anytime you need to merge insights from different perspectives, kind of like it's not just your opinion or her opinion, really it's a group decision. We want to use collaboration anytime we need to gain other people's commitment. So if we're trying to get buy-in on something, we know that people will support what they help to build. So we would want to collaborate on the solution to a problem rather than just dictating a solution if we really want, if we want other people to buy in. And we use collaboration anytime we need creativity. The more minds we have working on something, the more more likely we are to come up with a creative solution rather than if one person just says, this is what we're going to do. So these are examples of when collaborating would be the right solution for a conflict. Compromising, win some, lose some. We would use compromising when you need to come to a quick solution if you're under time pressure. So you might start with collaborating, but maybe you run out of time and you just got to go to the coin toss, which would be a quick form of compromise. We would also use compromising anytime that both parties are willing to give something up without sacrificing the whole goal. If you can't give anything up, then you're probably going to have to go with collaborating. But if you're willing to I'll give you this if you give me that, then compromising is going to be your best option because it's quicker. And a compromise is also a backup or a plan B when collaboration fails because maybe you're running out of time. So those are the reasons you would use compromise. Avoiding. I would say that most of us use avoiding way more than we should. It's probably the most overused one, and it's also the least productive. So I would always say there are very few situations where avoiding is the right choice, but here they are. When something really isn't important, when you just need to let it go. Say you're running through the airport to catch a flight and you bump into somebody and they spill their coffee all over you. It wasn't intentional. You're never going to see this person again. It's not worth it. We just let it go. Avoiding is also a good first tool as a first step in conflict resolution when we're letting that other person have some time to cool down. So it could be our step one, and then maybe step two is collaboration or compromise or something else. So avoiding is a technique that you can use in tandem with one of the other ones to give them that 20 minutes to cool down during fight or flight, for instance. We also use avoiding when we're just not the right person to deal with the conflict. Maybe it's above our pay grade, or maybe we don't have all the information we need. Then we can avoid it and hope that it gets resolved by the appropriate person. Now, that's a risky situation because sometimes the appropriate person isn't aware of the problem. So there are things we can do to help them be aware and then let the right person deal with it. And we also could use avoiding when we really have no chance of satisfying our concerns. Maybe our concerns are a little unrealistic and it's never going to happen. We're not going to get paid $1 million for our job. So that may be something we just have to let go. And then accommodating, you win, I lose. When do we accommodate? We accommodate when the issue is more important to the other person than it is to you. You have to really weigh. Some people just like to fight for the sake of fighting, or they like to win because they're very competitive and they try to win at all costs, even winning things that aren't that important. And you've risked damaging the relationship over, being right about what the Smurfs were named. It's really not that important. So if the issue is more important to the other person than it is to you, let it go, let them win. It's also something we can use strategically, as sometimes we accommodate someone as a goodwill gesture, because if I do this for them, then hopefully they'll do something for me later. So, or it's just putting deposits in the bank of good relations, because it's the nice thing to do, or because that you may need a favor from them down the road, and that's the way that we build on that. So anytime the issue is more important to the other person, or anytime the relationship is more important than the issue, if it's important that you maintain a good relationship with your mother-in-law, for instance, you're going to probably do a lot of accommodating on little issues like who makes dessert for Thanksgiving, because in the long run, the relationship matters more than the issue. So we accommodate. Now, it's important to note that all of us have a specific one of these that is probably our go-to mode, and we may not even be aware of it. Chances are we weren't aware that there were 4 other ones we could use. And we want to be careful not to overuse particular methods just because they're comfortable to us or because they come naturally. You can use all 5 of these. This is when we talked about conflict resolution being a social skill that we can get better at. This is what I mean. You can learn to use all 5 skills in the right situation. Just as I always compare it to being a handyman with a toolbox. If your favorite tool is a screwdriver, that's great, but a handyman doesn't use a screwdriver for every repair project because it's not the right tool. You can't change a light bulb with a screwdriver. You can't really hammer in a nail with a screwdriver. So we want to use the right tool for the job, and then we'll have the right result. So I want you to become aware of what your natural reaction is, and then really assess the situation and think, okay, that's my natural reaction, but it's not the right one in this situation. And a different one of these methods would be more productive and more effective in resolving the conflict. So if we put this on a grid, let's look at these 5 on a grid here. You notice that we have a horizontal axis and a vertical axis. The vertical axis is the importance of the issue. So as we go higher up on that vertical axis, we are seeing the conflict modes that you use when an issue is really important to you. The importance of the relationship is on the horizontal scale. So the further we go to the right, the more important the relationship is. So if the relationship is the most important, we would use one of the methods that are further to the right on the chart. So that would be collaborating and accommodating, because we're either going to let them have their way or we're going to work together so that we both get our way. So if we look at that, we see that competing is really high in importance of issue, but not so high in the importance of the relationship. So if somebody's using competing, They are in it to win the issue, and they are probably damaging the relationship a little bit. If the relationship isn't that important, then and the issue is more important, then competing is the right choice. But we see that compromising is right there in the middle. It's part way up on the importance of the issue and part way to the right on the importance of the relationship, which is why it's kind of a good middle of the road strategy. You're both, honoring the importance of the issue and the importance of the relationship. So I always tell people, when in doubt, if you absolutely aren't sure what to do, go for a compromise, because you're not damaging too much either way. But there are times when the issue really needs to be the most important, safety, things like that. And there are times when the relationship really needs to be the most important. And those will be things that you learn to think through in the process of managing your conflicts. So let's look real quickly at the benefits and of the different methods. When we compete, we are asserting our position. We kind of establish a reputation as somebody to not mess around with, and it's quick. We win, it's over. When we collaborate, we get better quality and better, more creative outcomes. We're forced to kind of learn and communicate. What does the other person need? What's their backstory? And we tend to get a stronger relationship and a stronger understanding out of it. When we compromise, we both get a deal that's good enough. It's quick. It's generally seen as fair. And it does tend to maintain relationships because everyone sees it as fair. When we avoid, we reduce stress. I'm not sure on whom, but we don't deal with the issue. We don't dwell on it. So it's saving a little stress for us. It does save us some time, and it does allow us to kind of wait for more favorable conditions, wait until we have more information, or wait until the person's calmed down a little bit. So it is a good first step. Accommodating, we're keeping the peace, and it's generally good at maintaining relationships. But like all things, there are benefits, but there are also costs for each of these. For instance, competing, it's going to strain relationships if it's always your way or the highway. And because you're not taking anyone else's opinion into consideration, you're getting a less than ideal decision because it's all just your opinion. It also can either escalate if the other person is also sticking to their guns and digging in, or just gridlock where nothing happens. When we collaborate, it takes a lot of time and energy, and it can, we really have to be transparent about our vulnerabilities. What do we really have to get out of this deal? What do we really care about? And so we have to assume that both parties are being honest about their vulnerabilities. When we compromise, we're each getting part of what we needed, but we're each giving up something. And so that thing that we had to give up may come back to visit us again in the form of a new conflict. So just know that a compromise may only take care of the situation temporarily, because those things that we each had to give up may resurface later. Avoiding, if we avoid dealing with something, the other people around us that are still dealing with it are going to get resentful. We have a delay because we're not dealing with the issue. And we can start to have declining work relationships because everyone says, well, this is never going to get resolved. We're just going to keep doing it the same old bad way. And why should I even bother? So we can face some resentment and some delays there. When we accommodate, we sacrifice our own concerns, and eventually we're going to get a little bitter or resentful about that. We also see that other people maybe lose respect for us because we let ourselves get walked on all the time. We don't stand up for ourselves. So then that just becomes the assumption. Oh, don't worry, Debbie never cares. She won't care if we always just, do it our way. Someday you might care, and then you might blow up over some seemingly small incident. So we don't want to let that get out of hand. So here is the part in the workshop where we actually talk about learning which mode to use, and we'll apply it in a few minutes to some actual situations. Rule of thumb, when we want to consider the importance of the issue, is it a really important issue, or is the outcome really, really important? Or is it more of an irritant? The issue is not that important. So we want to think about the importance of the issue versus the importance of the relationship. Do I need to work with this person every day? Is the relationship important to maintain, either because it's someone we're related to, or it's a neighbor, or it's the person in the next cubicle, or someone that we rely on to get our work done, and we really need to have a good working relationship with them. Those are the two things we want to think about. Is it issue or is it relationship? In just a minute here, we want to apply what we've learned. And we're going to break you into small groups. And if we turn to page 5 in your workbook or your handout, you'll see at the bottom conflict scenarios. So I'm going to break you into small groups. And in your group, you're going to be assigned either scenario 1, 2, or 3. And whichever one you're assigned, I want your group to read that scenario, answer the questions, and for just your scenario. And then on page 8, there's this chart that says reviewing, oh, you can't see it probably, preparing to resolve conflict. On that chart, I want you to think, is this issue on the scale of 1 to 5, how important is the issue? 5 being super duper important, 1 being not very important. Same thing with the importance of the relationship. 1 is it's a low important relationship. 5 is it's a very important relationship. So I want you to circle the number for how important the issue is and the number for how important the relationship is. Draw a line to where those two would connect, and it will put you in the conflict mode that you should use. Now, realistically, I know you're not going to carry this chart around with you every time you have a conflict, but having you work through the process of really assigning a number value to the importance of the relationship versus the importance of the issue, and thinking through where that mode, which mode is appropriate, will really help you in that process. So we are short on time, so I'll have you do that quickly, and then we will wrap up. So Jared is going to break you into groups. If you are in breakout room 1, 2, or 3, you are going to work on scenario 1. If you are in breakout group 4, 5, or 6, you're going to do scenario 2. And if you're in group 7, 8, or 9, you're going to do scenario 3. And because we are running short on time, we're probably only going to have about 5 minutes in these groups. So you can go ahead and start reading your scenario. And as a group, you can work through that, the questions and the chart. And I want you to come back and be able to report back which method you chose. Any questions? Okay, Jared, take it away.
All right, so you have your directions. I've got you into rooms, and we'll see you in about 5 minutes.
All right, everybody's popping back.
Right, yeah, it looks like we've got a majority of folks back.
Okay.
I think we've got everybody.
Okay. All right. Welcome back, everybody. I would like to just have, real quickly, we'll talk about each of the 3 scenarios and what method your group chose. So if there is one person from any of the groups that had scenario 1 that wants to raise their hand or be the spokesperson, just tell us what conflict resolution mode you decided to use for scenario 1 with you and Kathy working in a busy environment. And basically, Kathy takes a lot of breaks and comes back late from lunch and leaves you with a lot more work to do, and you're getting kind of ticked off about it. What option did your group come up with for dealing with the conflict?
Linda, do you want to go ahead and answer?
Yeah, thanks. Speak up.
Sure, if I can get my mic unmuted. Yes, we had number 1. We did talk about the why of it. Why would this person, what's going on here? What is it going to cause? We didn't really get down to the chart, but as far as our conversation, the importance of the issue would be high because it personally affects us and inevitably the team. It's going to blend over into the team. And the importance of the relationship is also high because you need to, this person is working with you. They are part of your intrinsic group. So if you're looking at the chart, then you would come through as a compromise. You need to discuss things, get on an even ground and understanding, and then be able to both persons compromise and work through what the issues really are and understand the issue.
Very good. Yes, I would say it's definitely because someone you have to work with on a regular basis that automatically that makes the relationship high. Doesn't mean you have to like this person, but it does mean that the relationship matters and having it be harmonious and at least a good working relationship is important. And obviously the issue is important. So I think you hit the nail on the head that we're definitely going to need to be in that compromise, collaborate space, which means finding out what the issue is. Now, there could be things that we're not aware of. Perhaps she has, maybe she's diabetic and she needs to test her blood sugar 3 times a day. That's why she's coming back late. There may be reasons that we aren't aware of and don't really need to be aware of, but just understanding that maybe she says, I have a medical condition. Okay, well, that changes everything, doesn't it? That makes our perception very different. Instead of thinking she's a slacker, now we realize, oh, there's a good reason why she's doing that. And I can't believe I jumped down her throat for that. Now I feel terrible. So we always need to get to the understanding level. And the best way to do that is with that compromise or collaborating. Good. Group or scenario 2, anyone from scenario 2 want to tell us about what they came up with? These are actually real situations that were sent to me by Shalise. So her committee must have come up with these. What do we do about the frustrated parent trying to use the online registration? Who wants to share?
Okay, I'll share. Yeah. So it's
Thanks,
important so it's important for them for us to fix that. We want to have a good relationship with the parent and the child in 4-H. So the relationship's important, and then we should be able to compromise and have, if they're having technical difficulty, come into the office and use the computer here to get them registered in 4-H.
Yeah. So, in one sense, we're accommodating their request to turn in the registration some other way, right? Because the relationship is so important. This is someone who's trying to register their child. They may register them for lots and lots of things. They may have 10 children. Who knows? We want to keep this parent happy. So we're willing to accommodate on how they get the registration in. We're not going to be so rigid that they absolutely have to do it on the online form, even though it's not working. We're going to say, hey, you can mail it in. You can come in here and do it. We're going to be accommodating on what they need to do. Now, we may collaborate on coming up with ideas for the most convenient way for them to turn it in, but ultimately we're agreeing to let them turn in the registration in a different way. So we're giving in basically because we want to maintain that relationship. We're finding that we're not letting a technological process get to the point where it frustrates and destroys a relationship, because that's what's most important. Thank you, Lori. Scenario 3, you have an educator in your office who continues to not follow extension fiscal policy. You never get the receipts for the expense reports. They always want you to do last minute tasks and give you things after the deadline. I'm sure that doesn't relate to anyone that you know. Anyone in breakout groups 7, 8, or 9 want to be the spokesperson for what you did in scenario 3?
I can attest to that one. It was, and I'm one of the fiscal people they would actually see. So I told them, just tell them Patty told you to do it. So that was our collaborate. Yeah. Believe it or not, I'm okay with that. Collaborating and compromising was kind of both of them, because you need those receipts and they need their programming. So, and they need their financing for the program. So you have those two, and it was a high relationship because you do have to work together to get that common goal.
Yeah, yeah, and that is a tough one because it's both high relationship, but fiscal policy is fiscal policy. And we all know at Ohio State, fiscal policy is kind of a big deal. So it is also a really important issue. So because the relationship is important and the issue is important, you really have no choice but to be in that collaborate space. Or if you run out of time, the compromise space. So these particular scenarios that we worked on today were real ones that Shalice gave me. And it does happen that, you know, most of them fall into that compromise, collaborate space. But there are certain ones, and we did talk about the parent, you know, that one being more of an accommodating. And I think you could make the argument that, you know, that this one could be competing as well. Like the fiscal policy is the fiscal policy, and this guy either needs to come into line or, you know, we're getting rid of him, depending on how, you know, how strict the university is about that fiscal policy. So if it were about, you know, wearing their safety equipment or something, that would have been a different scenario where competing would definitely have been the right answer, because it's, you know, it's about safety. Fiscal policy is not life or death. So we have some space there to collaborate or compromise. But know that there are examples where competing, you know, avoiding and then compromising, where we can use these in different combinations. So as I mentioned, this is a very brief introduction to what's normally a much longer session. So I wanted to just explain what happens in the rest of the session. We take that TKI assessment beforehand, so you know what your natural conflict style is, and maybe what your highest, the one you use most often, and the one you hardly ever use at all. And that just brings awareness to how you deal with conflict. And it might give you some insight into why you're not always successful in dealing with conflict, because you're trying to use that screwdriver here for every repair job, and we're not using all the tools available. We also, if you've taken a DISC assessment, we sometimes compare how you might resolve a conflict with each of the 4 DISC personality types. And then we actually go into a whole activity on common difficult behaviors, lying, complaining, gossiping, you know, and how we could deal with each one of them. And then we practice having we have everybody bring an actual conflict that they're facing right now, and they work through how to have that conversation to resolve the conflict. And I've included some information about how to do that on pages 9, 10, and 11 in your handout. So even though we don't have time to talk about that today, I have included all the pointers and the information, and even a practice worksheet to help you actually write down the words that you would say to someone that you need to have a conversation with. And then we would do some role playing where you'd actually get to practice having that conversation with someone. And then lastly, on the very last page of your handout, we would have you do some action planning. You know, what did I take from this workshop that I'm going to apply right away? What kind of support will I need? What kind of resources do I need? And then actually having a target date for completion. So you are welcome to use that action planning form to work through an actual conflict that you need to resolve, and actually, you know, give yourself some tasks that you need to accomplish in order to move that conflict to its resolution. So, sorry, I ran a little late. Very difficult to condense this into 1 hour. So I appreciate you sticking with me. Again, I'm Melanie Garcia. I'm with the Business Training and Educational Services Department of OSU Worcester. And this is a workshop that we can take, we have done virtually, we can do it in person. So if that seems like something that would be of interest to you, my email address is there, and you are welcome to contact me. Okay, I'll stick around for a little bit if anyone has questions. Otherwise, enjoy the rest of your conference and have a great day. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Melanie, for your time and your effort put in today. We really appreciate it. And thanks to you all for being here and being engaged throughout. We do have, I think, CES and JSEP are having some meetings at this time. So you have a bit of a break conference-wise in case you need to meet with any of those. And then we pick back up at 11 a.m. with another round of breakouts. The Bridges Out of Poverty session continues, or Employee Assistance Program also has a session at 11. So you should have an email this morning from Shalice to outline that as well with links. But again, Melanie, thank you so much. And we can certainly leave this room open if folks have questions, and we'll see you at the next session. Take care all. Thank you.